Chapter 217, Mr. Door's Description. Mr. Door. This naming style is very similar to mine. I wonder what was the real name of this pathetic fellow who was lost and trapped in the deep darkness amidst the storms is, and what his sequence is. Or rather, just as Emperor Roselle had guessed, he's one of the evil gods or devils. Klein let out a silent chuckle which was mixed with ridicule and self-deprecating humor. He was also interested in the history of the Fourth Epoch. I know of the most famous War of the Four Emperors in the Fourth Epoch, but the specific details and the main figures involved are limited to the information spread by the major churches. For example, the Black Emperor of the Solomon Empire. It wasn't until today that this so-called Mr. Door finally answered my questions by letting me know who the remaining three emperors are. The half-insane Blood Emperor of the Tudor dynasty, the Night Emperor of the Trunsoest Empire, and the Emperor of the Underworld of the Southern Continent, also known as Death. According to Mr. Door's description, in this war that changed the situation of the entire world, the Black Emperor, Blood Emperor, and Night Emperor fell one after another. The Emperor of the Underworld reaped the greatest benefits. Having said that, Mr. Door added with profound significance that after over a century of digestion, Death went mad, but he also became stronger. Therefore, Death teamed up with the primordial Demonis and brought about a pale disaster for the northern continent. Of course, this isn't something he witnessed personally, but rather something that he hears when he comes close to the real world every month. Death went mad, but also became stronger. Even deities can go mad? What a horrifying sentence. However, this also confirms my guess. Before the Fifth Epoch, those deities would often descend into the real world, directly interfering with the situation in the northern and southern continents. They might even personally appear just like Death. I asked Mr. Door if he had participated in the War of the Four Emperors. If so, what role did he play? And what was the position the seven deities maintained in this war? What role did they play? Mr. Door didn't answer my question. He only said in a teasing manner that the number of preeminent mighty figures in the Fourth Epoch far exceeds my imagination. In addition, he also mentioned two laws, one is the law of beyonder characteristics indestructibility, and the other is the law of similar sequence beyonder characteristics conservation, which is consistent with certain things that I have learned from that most secret and ancient organization, and also from some of the phenomena I have observed. This can lead to many interesting conclusions, making many explanations take on other forms, making one's mind tremble in horror. For example, when there are too many high sequence beyonders in the same sequence pathway, the low sequence beyonders would reduce, and vice versa. The beyonder characteristics had been fixed at the source. It will not increase or decrease. Does this mean that there really is a God who created all the deities, an omnipotent and omniscient God, and everything originated from him? This was the longest Roselle diary that Klein had ever seen. It took up 2 full pages, and one could imagine that it originally came on a double-sided page. It only became 2 separate pages after repeated copying. That's a lot of information. Klein sighed silently. As a history student who had graduated normally, he had always believed that the Solomon Empire, the Tudor dynasty, and the Trunsoest Empire came one after the other in a line, with a certain degree of restoration before a new political outcome was established. To his surprise, the War of the Four Emperors described by Mr. Door clearly and unambiguously revealed one thing: all 3 empires had existed at the same time. If this were true, then it would really overturn most of the current research on the Fourth Epoch in the field of history. Klein suddenly thought of the original Klein, who was filled with interest towards archaeology and the history regarding the Fourth Epoch. Today, I've helped him achieve his wish. I wonder if Death had already become a true deity during the War of the Four Emperors. It's hard to determine according to Mr. Door's descriptions. I can only first assume that the Emperor of the Underworld, who had obtained benefits from the War of the Four Emperors, had broken through his limits and become a deity, but he also went mad as a result. To have a deity go mad was truly terrifying. Just thinking about the details makes one tremble from the bottom of their heart. It's no wonder that the knowledgeable Emperor Roselle would use the word horrifying to describe this matter. Could it be that the so-called evil gods were crazy orthodox deities? Would that mean that there might only be evil gods left in this world one day? Man, does this mean that the end of days cannot be stopped? Klein smiled to hide the growing solemnity of his emotions. He felt that the future he imagined was filled with a dark grey hue. At the same time, he raised his evaluation of the Black Emperor, Blood Emperor, and Night Emperor, believing them to be the preeminent mighty figures who were close to being deities. Perhaps that means Sequence 1 is the peak existence of a single pathway. According to this logic, for Black Emperor to live for centuries or over a millennium wouldn't be unacceptable. That would explain the original Klein's confusion. He had obtained contradictory findings from the content recorded in the Antigonus family's notebook with his own mentor's viewpoint. He believed that the Black Emperor was the common name used by every emperor of the Solomon Empire. Perhaps, the Black Emperor had always been the same Black Emperor. Of course, other possibilities cannot be eliminated. For example, they could have been replaced 2 or 3 times, but is the name of that pathway's Sequence 1, Black Emperor? I wonder who Mr. Dor is in the history of the 4th epoch. Emperor Roselle didn't go into detail when describing his erroneous experiments and accidental coincidences, making it impossible for me to even try to converse with that Mr. Dor. The laws of Beyonder characteristics indestructibility and similar sequence Beyonder characteristics conservation shares the same description as the one used by the captain. Perhaps, the term he used came from Emperor Roselle. According to the 2 laws described by Mr. Dor, we can indeed deduce a lot of interesting speculations. For example, with there being so many holy artifacts and high sequence Beyonders in the 7 churches, there shouldn't be many low sequence Beyonders. But this contradicts reality, and the only reasonable explanation is an additional gift from the deities. For example, is the destruction of the nation of the Evernight due to the conservation of characteristics, that the mere possession of resources causes it to be in trouble? Or could it be said that their existence seriously weakens the potency of the Evernight pathway and threatens the position of the goddess? For example, theoretically speaking, certain sealed artifacts could also be used as the main ingredients for potion materials, or they can even be considered equivalent to potions. Of course, the prerequisite is to remove all latent dangers and madness. No wonder the documents that were unearthed called the 4th epoch, the epoch of the gods. So it turns out that in this epoch, there are many records of deities descending. Then what caused them to stop coming, to the point of there not being any revelations? If it wasn't for the fact that Beyonders receive responses from ritualistic magic, perhaps many of them would have doubted the existence of the deities. Many ideas came to Klein suddenly as he felt that he had delved deeper into the realm of mysticism in this Beyonder world. He flipped through the next 4 pages and was disappointed to realize that they were no longer related to Mr. Dor. His ability as a clown allowed him to conceal his emotions well, and coupled with the grey fog's obstruction, even Audrey, who was secretly observing him, didn't notice anything amiss. He gathered his chaotic thoughts and started reading the 3rd page of the diary. 10th September. I've endured it for a long time, but I still can't help but complain a little. I must have had F King SHT for brains to chose the savant path, right? Of course, this has indeed allowed me to develop my greatest advantage, allowing the Church to attach great importance to me. But the problem is that the first few sequences lack any Beyonder powers needed for combat. I can only make do by relying on mystical items and rely way too much on external items. For example, Sequence 9 Savant only has extraordinary abilities in memory, learning, and practical skills. For example, Sequence 8 Archaeologist gains a strong physique and corresponding ancient knowledge, and they can only barely apply some ritualistic magic. For example, Sequence 7 Appraiser, whose ability is to quickly identify mystical objects, allowing them to avoid hidden dangers to the greatest extent. For example, Sequence 6 Artisan, who can produce machinery wonder but not very powerful Beyonder objects. Apart from that, one's standard in ritualistic magic will be enhanced. It's no wonder its modern name is Machinery Specialist. Comparatively speaking, the Sequence 7 Warlock and Sequence 6 Scrolls Professor of the Mystery Prior pathway are sufficiently tempting. It would be great if only the church has the complete sequence and that the hidden sage doesn't exist. However, I finally received some good news. After I advance again, I'll gain Beyonder powers, combat powers that I can call my own. Sequence 5 Astromancer. Its modern name scares me a little. It's actually called Astronomer. Am I going to end up as an all-powerful mad scientist? Heavens have mercy on me. I was only a second-tier student at the college entrance examination. It had to be said that Emperor Roselle had a strange talent for making jokes. Even the recently dispirited Klein couldn't help but twitch his mouth, wishing to light a candle for this senior. Study hard and improve by the day is indeed a wise saying. He lampooned and remembered the unique trait of the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. They lacked Beyonder powers when it came to combat, but they were good at making and using items. After flipping to the third page of the diary, Klein continued reading. 2nd June, the kingdom has created chaos, again and again, instigating wars without being able to completely destroy the Fisak Empire, the Lone Kingdom, and the Finapotter Kingdom. As such, the kingdom has no choice but to shoulder huge debts, and its economy is on the verge of collapse. From my observations, the people, merchants, and soldiers are very dissatisfied. The riots are just lacking a spark. This is my chance. But I have to be very careful. The Sauron family has witnessed the history of the Fourth Epoch and is an ancient family with a high possibility of having high-sequence Beyonders. I need the support of the Church, as well as gain a tacit agreement with the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun. I can't appear immediately. First, I'll let the rebels destroy order before I end it all as a protector. Consul Roselle Gustav. I like that name. Chapter 218, Free General Knowledge. June 3rd. After discussing with Edwards and the others, I gave up on the idea of reaching a tacit understanding with the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun. This might very well reveal my true intentions, making the Sauron family and the ancient nobles who support them aware of them in advance and carry out a direct approach. That would make matters extremely difficult and dangerous. It's a pity that Grimm died in the Sea of Fog. He was the smartest among us. Descend into chaos. Descend. Only with everything in chaos will I get the chance to fish in troubled waters. Only when the Sauron family is incapable of handling this situation will the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun reluctantly acknowledge me. Perhaps I should give some help to those rebels, but how should I conceal myself so that no one would notice? June 4th, Zeratul from the Secret Order came to visit me in incognito very suddenly. And then? Klein was just feeling intrigued over the reason why Zeratul, leader of the Secret Order, would seek Roselle on the eve of the rebellion and coup d'état when he realized that the two subsequent pages had nothing to do with it. This made him feel a sense of irrepressible anger. Although the 3 diary pages didn't provide very detailed descriptions, with rather straightforward accounts from Roselle, Klein could still feel the famous turmoil in Intis that happened in 1173, more than 100 years ago. The outcome was clearly recorded in history textbooks. As a colonel, Roselle quashed the rebellion and enacted political changes. The Intis kingdom was transformed into a republic, with him acting as a self-appointed consul. In the following 19 years, he reformed the penal code, encouraged inventions, and protected the Industrial Revolution. He greatly increased the country's strength and fought wars both north and south, making Lemberg, Mason, Sagar, and other countries protectorates under the Intis Republic. He also made the 3 mighty countries on the northern continent, the Fisak Empire, the Lone Kingdom, and the Finapotter Kingdom, bow their heads. At the end of 1192, almost 20 years after his appointment as consul, Roselle converted the Republic into an empire, declaring himself Caesar. Less than 6 years later, he perished in the White Maple Palace, ending the Fifth Epoch's most legendary piece of history to date. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that there was more to Roselle's death than what appeared on the surface. It was just like how this famous historical event definitely had power struggles amongst Beyonders behind it, and that a Beyonder faction had leveled the situation, unlike the descriptions in textbooks. As expected, one of the so-called 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, Grimm, died in the Sea of Fog. In a previous diary page, Roselle had written that there was something wrong with this horseman. It seems to have something to do with the tiny island where they discovered many extraordinary beings. Not only was it a fortuitous encounter, but it was also a dangerous one. Klein thought of a previous entry and turned to the 5th page, feeling emotional. The contents of this page are of little value. They consist of Roselle's comments after drinking in 1128 Ormer red wine, the disillusion of finding the woman who had gained his adoration in his youth to be aged and out of shape, as well as a degenerate summary of a certain period when he was addicted to playing cards. The 6th page was about the same as the first one, with accounts of his daily life. However, the last one made Klein's eyes light up. 8th April, I have to send someone to investigate the secret order to get more information. I can't repeat my passiveness from before. I can't let Zeratul lead me by the nose anymore. So, did you discover anything, Comrade Roselle? Since Klein couldn't find the rest of the information, he could only force himself to calm down and wait for the next gathering when the hanged man would hand over another 6 pages. He knew that an investigation from over 100 years ago was unlikely to help him find any clues related to the Secret Order Association. After all, over such a long period of time, other than the special ones, many of the high-sequence Beyonders would have already died of old age, not to mention the middle or low-level members. However, Klein believed that this would help him obtain inspiration and grasp the precise identity and activity patterns that the Secret Order often used. Putting down the 6 diary pages, Klein tapped his right index finger on the edge of the long bronze table, slowly moving his gaze from Miss Justice to the hanged man, and then to the sun. Right, in the diary just now, there was a line Emperor Roselle described, God who created all the deities, an omnipotent and omniscient God. This is very similar to the customs of the City of Silver. Where did he hear this from? Could it be from that most ancient and secret organization which controls the world from behind the scenes? This organization was established before the forsaken land of God was forsaken? Suddenly, Klein had a new idea. He said with a low and gentle smile, Roselle mentioned some hidden history in his diary, and mentioned some simple general knowledge. The latter reminded me of something that I don't recall informing you all. Audrey suddenly fell into a trance. She immediately turned her body around and looked at the very top of the ancient long table in pleasant surprise. Mr. Fool is taking the initiative to mention the contents of Roselle's diary. What would it say? She was so excited and thrilled that she completely forgot that she was a spectator. Compared to her, the hanged man, Alger, was much more composed. However, the subconscious straightening of his back heartlessly betrayed him. Only the son, Derek, had always believed that the items of interest to Mr. Fool contained many mysteries, but he didn't know anything about Emperor Roselle and didn't know what this name represented in the northern continent. Thus, he just found it difficult to hide his curiosity and didn't reveal any unusual behavior. Mr. Fool, did Emperor Roselle mention some general knowledge? I'm willing to pay for this information, Audrey couldn't help but say. However, I want it to be communicated to me privately. She added silently in her heart. Klein chuckled and said, there's no need. This is very simple general knowledge. After reading this part of the diary, as the summoner of the Tarot Club, I feel it's necessary to let all of you know this. Of course, I'm very certain that some of you are already aware of this. He was mainly referring to the sun. The City of Silver had a history of 2,000 to 3,000 years, so it was impossible for them to not discover the law of Beyonder characteristics indestructibility. Moreover, they were in a relatively extreme environment. Even if the surrounding areas had no lack of monsters in the darkness, there would still be times when they failed to obtain the corresponding materials. In order to pass on their heritage, in order for their city to continue on, using the Beyonder characteristics of the remains of their predecessors to create a potion wasn't particularly unacceptable. To them, this was perhaps a sacred and glorious ceremony. Of course, Klein could see from a previous exchange that the hanged man knew something. It's a pity that Miss Justice cannot always be made to pay in gold pounds and transfer the money to my blessed. My blessed can't appear any less impressive. I mustn't destroy the image of the powerful man that Mr. Azek has created. Yes, I'll give it a try when I have the chance. After all, no matter how powerful a being is, they'll have subordinates that run errands. For instance, the Evernight goddesses Sleepless. No one would ever suspect that the Evernight goddess isn't a true deity just because the low-level Nighthawks are weak. Klein sighed silently. Thank you very much. Mr. Fool, you are just too generous. Audrey replied in joy. She was originally feeling 3 seconds of regret for the coarse action of using cash to purchase the information. Klein stopped rapping the table and described with a calm voice, the first piece of general knowledge law of Beyonder characteristics indestructibility. The characteristics of a Beyonder is never destroyed or reduced. It's only passed from one carrier to the next. Without realizing it, I used captain's tone. Klein's lips subconsciously curled upwards. It cannot be destroyed or reduced. It just transfers from one carrier to another. Audrey ruminated over Mr. Fool's description, feeling that there was too much meaning in that simple sentence. Her emerald green eyes turned, and when she saw that neither the Hanged Man nor the Sun showed any signs of surprise or contemplation, she immediately understood that these two members of the Tarot Club had long known of this law. Only I didn't know, she thought, feeling somewhat aggrieved, but she quickly began to praise Mr. Fool for his kindness. At this point, Klein added, after a rampager dies, they will leave behind an item of Beyonder characteristics. It could be the main ingredient, or it could be a mystical artifact that requires sealing. An ordinary Beyonder's death results in similar results. However, the item left behind will be equivalent to the corresponding potion without the supplementary ingredients. Of course, the item alone will contain Beyonder powers. They can be used as a half-mystical object. The plain and indifferent words instantly echoed in Audrey's mind. Layers stacked upon layers and, bit by bit, it eventually reached a crescendo. Audrey thought of cannibalism and the question, would a sequence pathway be severed if the source of Beyonder materials ceased to exist? She had asked the Hanged Man previously came to mind. Now, she knew the answer, but she would have rather not heard it. She felt like she was having a nightmare. How can it be so cruel? Why is it so dark? Audrey had previously seen some bad situations that involved Beyonders, but those situations were only caused by a person's own perverse and evil nature. For example, Mr. A or Kilangos. They didn't affect her yearning and love for mysticism and the Beyonder world. However, this time, she discovered that the mystical world was filled with grayness and darkness. Wake up, Audrey, you can't be naive. Consider that the cruelty and darkness described by Mr. Fool are predictable. Since I've chosen this path, I have to bravely walk down it. Audrey consoled herself, easing her mood a little. She saw that the Hanged Man and the Sun were making only habitual movements and appeared to understand what had just been said. Humph. Mr. Hanged Man is terrible. He even wanted to use this information as an exchange previously. Ugh. This information is indeed worth a lot and is quite important, but it's only a simple piece of general knowledge to us and Mr. Fool. Audrey suddenly wanted to laugh a little. Her mood began to improve, and she slowly pushed all the extreme examples that she had just thought of aside. Klein wasn't surprised by the three members' reaction. He continued in a calm tone, the second piece of general knowledge law of similar sequence Beyonder characteristics conservation. Law of similar sequence Beyonder characteristics conservation. The Hanged Man slightly changed his sitting posture. He felt that he understood something, but he was unable to fully understand what this law represented and what it consisted of. Justice and the Sun shared the same feelings as he did. They were unable to directly understand the true meaning behind this law. Why similar sequence? Alger couldn't help asking. Klein smiled and replied, what do you wish to pay for the answer? One of the ideas he had was that general knowledge was free, but any explanation required a fee. This both matched his status and didn't waste the information. Free things cost the most. Chapter 219, Explanation. If the Fool had simply mentioned that there was some simple general knowledge contained in Roselle's diary, the Hanged Man, Alger, wouldn't necessarily be determined to pay the price for the answer, partly because the description of it being simple killed his curiosity. Another aspect stemmed from his constant wariness against making trades with the fool, as it reminded him of the examples when deals were made with evil gods and devils. But now that he knew the so-called contents of simple general knowledge, his interest was piqued. Yet, he was unable to understand parts of the description, much less gain any actual or deep grasp of the concept. Therefore, he couldn't hold back his urges to ask in absolute reverence, "Mr. Fool, what kind of payment do you want?" "Yes, yes." Justice Audrey nodded her head nearly indiscernibly but very frequently, indicating that this was something she wanted to ask as well. Although the son Derek remained silent and didn't make any additional body gestures, the look he gave to the fool explained everything. Klein, who was waiting for such a response, smiled and said, "Information regarding the secret order." "The secret order," the hanged man Alger muttered to himself. He wasn't unfamiliar with this term. He had once received payment for explaining to Miss Justice about many secret organizations, including the secret order. Audrey and Derek both frowned subconsciously. The former's only understanding of the secret order was limited to what the hanged man had described, and the latter had never even heard of such an organization. Klein had long anticipated what the son would feel, but he wasn't surprised. According to his conjecture, the area where the City of Silver was located should have been a part of the third epoch after the appearance of the first blasphemy slate and before the appearance of the second blasphemy slate. It was even possible that it was the direct catalyst or manifestation of the cataclysm. The Zeratul family had only stepped onto the stage of history in the fourth epoch, and the secret order was created in the latter half of the fourth epoch. There was no way both entities could have existed in the same period. It would surprise Klein if the son were to know about the secret order. He would then have to overturn some of his speculations, reconstruct his knowledge of the City of Silver, the forsaken land of God, and the Zeratul family. After nearly 20 seconds of silence, Alger looked at the fool in the grey fog, deliberated his words and said, "I will accept this request and help you gather information regarding the secret order. Can you make payment in advance?" It wasn't surprising that a suspected deity was interested in an ancient and secret organization, therefore, Alger wasn't puzzled about it. More importantly, after many gatherings, he had a guess in his mind, which was that Mr. Fool's state wasn't perfect, that he might be in a predicament, that all his attempts and the actions of his blessed on the northern and southern continents were to help him break free from his confines. This might even be related to the huge secret of why the seven deities no longer descend upon the real world after the fourth epoch. A thought flashed through Alger's mind, and he shuddered as he felt himself entering the realm of the gods. Upon hearing the hanged man's request, Klein leaned back in his chair and nodded. "No problem. If the information you have collected exceeds the value of the answer, I will provide you with further compensation. As for the circumstances in which the value of the answer was lacking, it is naturally up to the esteemed Mr. Fool to decide. If he has the ability to make the additional payment, so be it. If not, forget it." Klein silently added. Justice Audrey's eyes lit up all of a sudden. She raised her hand and said, "I want to partake in this deal." Klein laughed and replied, "Sure." Frankly speaking, his main target was Miss Justice because she was a local of Backlund and she had mixed herself into several Beyonder circles. Her access to information in the Land of Hope far exceeded his, considering it was his first time in the capital. She was also more informed than the hanged man who was out at sea most of the time. According to the earlier revelation he received from his divination, Klein believed that the clues related to the secret order would appear in Backlund and not anywhere else. The son Derek listened quietly and after some thought, said, "I'm willing to use the payment I reserved and exchange it for the answer." In the previous three-way deal, he had traded the Sequence 8 telepathist formula for Sequence 9 Bard. Klein had promised to compensate him, and his choice at the time had been to save it up and prepare for the subsequent potion formulas and main ingredients. Klein nodded his head and gave an explanation that he had long prepared. The so-called similar sequence refers to how high sequence beyonders are exchangeable with other pathways. Let me give an example. The death pathway's sequence 5, Gatekeeper, can not only be advanced normally, but one can also choose the Giant Pathway, which is the Gatekeeper Pathway's sequence 4, Demon Hunter. This won't lead to the danger of losing control, nor will it accumulate madness. It's different from taking the wrong potion. Of course, if it's not a similar sequence, a semi-deranged state is the best result. Exchangeable. Audrey blurted out, surprised and delighted. She was surprised that sequence pathways weren't completely fixed, that they didn't need to follow the original path all the way. The price of switching wasn't being semi-deranged and never to advance again. Within the 22 paths of the divine, there were special circumstances and sequences which were similar. And what delighted her was that she had another chance to choose again in the future. It was just like being able to select something that caught her interest at Philip's department store. It was a wonderful experience. So that's how it is. Alger silently muttered to himself, suddenly feeling like he had understood several things at once, and he had resolved many of the doubts accumulated in his past experiences. This information is way too valuable. As expected of Mr. Fool. So-called simple general knowledge is enough to shock and awe most low-sequence beyonders and benefit them immensely. He sighed inwardly. Derek the Sun was a little disappointed because he had no intention of changing sequences. He wanted to be the sun that lit up the darkness and dispelled the curse. However, he quickly recalled an incident that happened in the City of Silver. The former chief, a powerhouse who had the greatest possibility of breaking past the limitations of Demon Hunter, had built a mausoleum for himself and went deep inside, making it his home. Afterwards, he appeared less and less, until the main door of the mausoleum could no longer be opened. Back then, the citizens of the City of Silver all believed that a problem had arisen during the chief's advancement and that he had gone mad, to the point of being close to losing control. He was believed to have finished himself off. Now, combined with the description from the fool, the sun suddenly thought of another possibility. That chief might have been attempting to advance in sequence through a similar pathway. In one of his explorations deep into the darkness, he had acquired the corresponding formula for the death pathway, and the mausoleum might have been a special requirement. But in the end, he still failed? But why didn't he turn into a monster? What did he encounter in that dark mausoleum? The City of Silver doesn't have the sequence potion formulas after Demon Hunter? As these thoughts crossed his mind, Derek was suddenly jolted back to his senses by Miss Justice's reserved voice. Mr. Fool, may I ask what other pathways are exchangeable with the spectator sequencer pathway? Sequence 4 Demon Hunter sounds pretty good. That's very suitable for me, very suitable for Justice. Audrey admired the first high sequence name that she knew. I want to know too. Klein was tempted to answer Miss Justice's question in such a manner. Before he could say anything, Audrey added in a faltering tone, I can pay for the answer to this question. How many gold pounds do you think is enough? I believe that your blessed will need a certain amount of funds for their activities. Having said that, she recalled how Mr. Fool's blessed had easily finished Pirate Admiral Kilangos who possessed creeping hunger. Clearly, he was a high-sequence beyonder, so she nearly said, I apologize. Mr. Fool, treat it as though I never said a thing. However, since she had already asked, she couldn't back down. Come on, Audrey. Perhaps the fool has a weaker blessed? Audrey quietly bit at her lips, silently encouraging herself. Gold pounds? Klein thought about it seriously and said, we'll make the transaction after enough information about the secret order is gathered. As he spoke, he recalled his informant in the Psychology Alchemists, Daxter Goodryan. Captain and I. Sigh. Daxter's identity as an informant can no longer be verified. I wonder if it's a tragedy or a comedy. It's a pity that I can no longer contact him anymore. Otherwise, it would be the most convenient way to obtain the information regarding the spectator pathway from him. Klein smirked. All right. Audrey answered happily. The conversation between the two made the hanged man, who was about to ask a similar question, shut his mouth. He left it until he had gathered enough information on the secret order. After a brief silence, Audrey turned her head to look at Mr. Fool and raised her hand very slightly. After receiving a nod of confirmation, she turned to the member opposite her and asked with a sense of anticipation, "Mr. Hanged Man, my tip allowed you to finish Vice Admiral Hurricane. Have you prepared the complete pituitary gland of a mature rainbow salamander? That's one of the reasons why I returned to the sea." Alger nodded gently and said, "I've gotten the Beyonder material you wanted. But how should I give it to you?" "How? How should it be given to me?" Audrey froze for a moment as she lost herself in thought. "It's impossible to just give my address. Nor can I go through Zio and Furs. That will reveal the fact that I'm a Beyonder." It's not impossible. Emperor Roselle once said that when we should choose the lesser of two evils. At that moment, Klein's heart stirred. He lightly tapped the edge of the long table and smiled. "Miss, sir, are you willing to cooperate with me in making an attempt regarding this matter?" Chapter 220, Klein's Sacrificial Trial. Attempt. Justice was instantly thrilled as she nodded her, acting reserved and elegant. "I'm very willing to cooperate." As a spectator, she clearly remembered that Mr. Fool had only used the word attempt on two things. The first time involved bringing her and the Hanged Man into this mysterious space, and the second time was when they were given an honorary name so that they could attempt to make a prayer. And the outcome was sufficiently successful, revealing his true nature. What would it be this time? It really is something to look forward to. Audrey restrained her impatience and tried her best to behave as a qualified spectator. Attempt. Alger suddenly tensed up, viewing the fool's proposal with utmost wariness. What does he want to do? What is his true purpose? Is this good or bad for me? One by one, thoughts popped up in his mind. The rapidly rotting appearance of Vice Admiral Hurricane Kilangos surfaced in Alger's mind. Finally, he lowered his head and respectfully replied, "Your wish is my wish." Beside him, Derek looked at the Hanged Man, and then at Justice, wondering why they were so sensitive to this so-called attempt. Klein lightly tapped his fingers on the edge of the long bronze table and smiled. "This attempt will make your transaction easier and safer, and it will definitely be sufficiently confidential." He turned his head to the side and looked at the Hanged Man. He said with a moderate pace, "Do you remember the sacrificial ritual described by the sun?" Klein had deliberately mentioned it to show how open he was. It made it difficult for the members of the Tarot Club to imagine that the sacrificial ritual he was about to provide had actually first been obtained from the sun and that he had gone through all that time and effort back then to trick the sun out of a template sacrificial ritual. "I remember. I do come into contact with such things usually," Alger answered truthfully, but his heart was throbbing. Since the Orthodox gods rarely responded to similar rituals, the word sacrifice had often been equated to evil gods and devils in the Fifth Epoch. Thinking about how this could lead to a terrifying outcome, the Hanged Man felt as if he was walking at the edge of the abyss. If he wasn't careful, he would fall in, only to be eroded and devoured. Klein followed his plans and didn't provide further explanations. He nodded slightly and said, "My idea is for you to sacrifice the Beyonder material to me through the ritual and I'll bestow them to Miss Justice. A transaction like this will be beneficial for both of you." "That can be done?" Audrey was instantly dumbfounded. She felt that this exceeded the limits of her imagination. But she very quickly came to her senses and understood the advantages of this method and the true nature of a deity hidden behind this simple act. "Mr. Fool is great. As expected, our Tarot Club will be different from the other secret organizations. We'll use the method of deities to exchange for material goods and ingredients." Audrey almost said "praise the lady" in her mind out of habit, but in the end, she said, "Praise Mr. Fool" instead. Alger turned even warier as he entered a state of calm thoughts. "Honorable Mr. Fool, what do I need to do?" He tried to figure out the true purpose of the Fool from the process of the sacrificial ritual. Klein lightly pressed his right hand and said, "Like I said, this is only an attempt. It might not succeed, so it will need your cooperation. First of all, prepare an altar. There's no need to make it too complicated, it can be very simple and crude. The only requirement is to engrave or draw this symbol. As he spoke, a screen of light appeared in front of him. On it was the symbol of the hidden pupilless eye and the mysterious symbol of the partial contorted lines, the same symbol on the back of the fool's chair. After previous experiments without using materials with spirituality, Klein was certain that the sacrificial ritual he designed could create an illusory gate above the grey fog, similar to the door of summoning. However, his strength alone couldn't construct a stable channel, and he could only use the uniqueness of the mysterious space above the grey fog to complete the sacrifice. Therefore, he was 90% confident that the ritual would be successful. The only problem was if an ordinary passageway could be constructed using ordinary materials that contained spirituality, or did it need to be beyonder materials as well as a sufficient number of them. I'll let Miss Justice and Mr. Hanged Man bear the cost of this experiment. In any case, they knew from the very beginning that the Tarot Club was a product of an attempt. It can be foreseen that there would be other attempts subsequently, and failure is inevitable. Even deities are no exception. Klein decided to transfer the costs. As the Hanged Man, Justice, and the Sun were attempting to memorize the symbol, Klein chuckled. "If you forget, you can pray to me, and then you can remember." "All right," Audrey answered happily. "With Mr. Fool, rituals aren't tedious and troublesome," she thought happily. The Hanged Man nodded in response as Klein continued the description. "Secondly, follow the normal procedure, but there's no need to burn any more additional herbs or apply the holy oil. There's no restriction on time, just chanting my name is enough. Remember, use ancient Hermes or Jotun to recite this piece of prayer. Your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for you to take his offerings. I pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom. After you finish chanting, combine the materials that contain spirituality with the natural power created by the incantation, and await my response. If you don't succeed in this step, change from materials containing spirituality to beyonder materials, and try again from the beginning." After listening quietly to the procedure, Alger felt that his previous guess was very likely to be the truth. The Fool was in a predicament. He offered alluring attempts, making attempts one step at a time, and planned to use himself, Justice, and the Sun to slowly break free of the restrictions. In the end, he might even descend into the real world. This was also the true reason why he had initially pulled people into this mysterious space, agreeing to the establishment of the Tarot Club. Even without this previous speculation, Alger believed that he would have come to the same conclusion after hearing of the experimental procedures required after the sacrificial ritual and comparing it with the Fool's previous attempts. The only thing that stumped him was the possession of a powerful blessed, therefore, there was no need for him to use himself, Justice, and the Sun. His blessed could make similar attempts. There must be secrets I don't know about yet. The attempts need to be sufficiently secretive. And perhaps his blessed is being watched by certain existences? Alger began connecting the dots. After Klein finished describing the ritual, he asked in a low but gentle voice, "The sacrificial ritual needs a specific time. Mr. Hanged Man, when do you plan on making the attempt?" This was different from responding to a request which could have a delayed response. The stable passage created by the sacrificial ritual could only exist for a very short period of time, so Klein had to wait above the grey fog ahead of time. The rainbow salamander's pituitary gland is the only beyonder material I have with me for the time being. As for materials with spirituality, I do have quite a lot. Mr. Fool, once the gathering ends, I'll immediately attempt the first scenario. If it fails, I'll seek out other beyonder materials. Once I obtain anything, I'll inform you by praying to confirm a time, Alger said as he couldn't help but turn his gaze towards Miss Justice. As a spectator, Audrey instantly understood what he meant. She answered without the slightest hesitation, "If any additional beyonder materials are required, I'll compensate you afterward." "Well, I can't guarantee the specific type of material you would want." As expected of the wealthy Miss Justice, the Fool Klein couldn't help but sigh before chuckling. "We have come to an agreement." He looked at Justice and said after some thought, "Once Mr. Hanged Man's attempt succeeds, I'll inform you of the bestowment ritual." all right. Audrey was entirely confident with Mr. Fool's abilities. After answering the question, a sudden thought struck her as she realized that the exchange of money could also be done through this method. Of course, this was only if the attempt was a success. I wonder if items without any spirituality would work or not. I'll ask Mr. Fool again after the attempt is successful. Audrey's lips curled as she thought of the beautiful future. With the sacrifice and bestowment topic coming to an end, she deliberated for a few seconds before saying, Mr. Fool, I've found 2 ladies suitable for our tarot club. They're both Beyonders and have their own circle and resources in Backlund. They're also able to keep a secret and have decent personalities. Are you willing to let them join the gathering? Does Justice want to strengthen her faction within the tarot club? This was the most instinctual thought that Alger had. Derek was very interested in this matter as he looked sideways at Mr. Fool, waiting for his answer in anticipation. Klein appeared to be in a bit of a dilemma. Previously, he had imagined that the members of the tarot club wouldn't know each other, and they would then develop their own subordinates, forming a relatively tight and secretive organization. This way, even if a certain member was exposed, captured, or had their spirit channeled, it wouldn't have much of an impact on the tarot club. But Miss Justice's description just happened to hit his weak spot. He was hoping to find clues regarding the secret order and Lanevis by acquainting himself with Beyonders with different circles and resources in Backlund. If it's done through Justice, the person involved would eventually hold back. However, I'm not sure if it's possible to pull them up above the grey fog simply by reciting my name. In order to maintain his image, Klein didn't think too much and instead procrastinated on it. He said calmly, it will require a certain amount of examination. Miss Justice, use a clandestine method that wouldn't expose yourself to let them know of my name to garner interest in them. When Audrey saw that her proposal was about to be accepted, she immediately responded in excitement, yes, Mr. Fool. After a few more exchanges, the gathering came to an end. The Sun, the Hanged Man, and Justice returned, while Klein remained in the grey fog, waiting for the sacrifice. Chapter 221, The Tarot Club at a Higher Level. The Blue Avenger was like a leaf on the surface of the undulating waves of the Sonia Sea. At times, it was raised high and sometimes low from the ebbing of the waves, but there was no sign of it being at risk of capsizing. Alger Wilson stood in the captain cabin, his back to the shelves of red and white wine, as he subconsciously paced around. Finally, he gritted his teeth and returned to the mahogany desk with a grim expression. He removed the brass sextant, found a piece of paper and a pen, and leaned over to draw the complex, mysterious symbol given to him by the Fool. With a seafarer's memory, Alger quickly completed the first step of the sacrificial ritual. Then, he opened the drawer and took out a candle. He set up the ritual according to the dualism principles and placed a candle above the symbol that was formed by the combination of the pupilless eye and the partial contorted lines. One candle was placed in the middle that represented the person making the sacrifice. After cleaning up all the items on the table, Alger condensed pure water in the palm of his hand and wiped the altar clean. He then used the silver dagger from the ceremony to create a ceiling wall that surrounded his desk. After doing all this, he used his spirituality to light up the 2 candles and retreated a few steps under the dim light. Taking a deep breath, Alger lowered his head and recited in ancient Hermes. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. You are the mysterious ruler above the grey fog. You are the king of yellow and black who wields good luck. Your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for you to take his offerings. I pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom. This ancient incantation reverberated within the wall of spirituality, stirring up spiraling gales as they swept forth with the force of nature. It was the oldest sacrificial language created by human Beyonders, and it contained many mysteries itself. However, it lacked sufficient protection for the user. Bearing with the pain that was akin to having knives slicing across his skin, Alger took out a small dark brown glass bottle from his pocket, unscrewed the lid, and poured out a lot of sesame-shaped granules. These granules swirled with a metallic luster and exuded an indescribable sense of beauty. Alger scattered these granules into the wind. Whoosh! The gale grew stronger but was no longer tempestuous. It was dyed in two separate colors, silver and black. As they continued to collide and mix, the two differently colored winds were infused into the candle flame that symbolized the Fool, burgeoning and tearing open an illusory ordinary-sized door. Its surface was carved with the same symbol that Alger had drawn. At this moment, Klein witnessed the appearance of the hazy door behind his high-backed chair. He could feel the spirituality in the air that was rippling apart and stimulating the mysterious space. It seems to be working. Klein suddenly had a premonition and immediately spread out his spirituality, infusing it with upheavals and stimulation. Creak. Amidst the insubstantial sounds, the blurry door slowly opened. In the captain cabin, Alger suddenly saw the illusory door, formed out of wind and light, open. Behind it was deep darkness formed from an innumerable number of almost invisible shadows. They were lustrous splendors encompassing massive amounts of knowledge. Situated above them was the thick grey fog with the ancient palace overlooking the real world. Such a scene caused Alger to involuntarily tremble. It was a deep fear, an indescribable excitement. He hurriedly picked up the rainbow salamander's pituitary gland that he had long prepared. He held it with both hands, and, with his head bowed, he raised the palm-sized object which was constantly changing in color and had a soft feel to the ridges to the illusory door. Alger's hands grew lighter under the sudden appearance and instant disappearance of a suction force. He lost the slight tingling sensation that the rainbow salamander's pituitary gland gave him. He didn't dare raise his head until he heard the deep voice of the Fool echoing in his ears. "You did well. It's my honor," Alger answered without any hesitation. He looked ahead again, only to see that the illusory door had disappeared. The gale had stopped, and the candle flames had returned to their original state. After the candles were extinguished according to the normal procedures, Alger sat down with a complicated expression and said to himself silently, "In the beginning, only people could be pulled into the world above the grey fog. After a while, responses could be made by listening to prayers. Now, sacrifices and bestowment can be performed. Mr. Fool is freeing himself from his predicament one step at a time, and bit by bit, will he enter the real world?" This guess or conclusion frightened and worried Alger, but he also felt a bit of delight. "At least I'm a member of the Tarot Club, one of the earliest members." He sighed. In the majestic palace above the grey fog, Klein was playing with the pituitary gland of the rainbow salamander. Various colors were reflected on his face as they constantly changed colors. A slight tingling sensation came from his palm, and a strong sense of accomplishment filled his heart, causing him to reveal a genuine smile. In the future, the Tarot Club will become even more miraculous. After reflecting over the situation, Klein extended his spirituality and sent his will to the crimson star representing Miss Justice. After returning to her bedroom, Audrey was no longer able to sit quietly on the edge of the bed. She would restlessly flip through the books by her bed and from time to time, scrutinize herself in the mirror with an unfocused gaze. She was looking forward to the completion of the hanged man's sacrificial ritual, but she was also afraid that the result would be a failure. Emperor Roselle had said that one must remain calm and collected when important matters arise. "Audrey, come on, take a deep breath. Or perhaps, I should go tease the dog?" However, Susie can talk and think, so she's an entity with her own dignity. I can't just casually tease her. Audrey's mind wandered, her hand unconsciously wringing an ornate doll dressed in splendid clothing. After an unknown period of time, a thick grey fog suddenly appeared before her eyes, and in the depths of the fog, there was a lofty chair. Sitting there, the Fool said with a smile, "Miss Justice, the attempt was successful. Have you prepared the materials that contain spirituality?" "That's great. As expected of Mr. Fool." Audrey forgot the hanged man's role in this matter. She held back her excitement and said, "Yes, I always have such materials with me." Audrey had been the same even before she joined the Tarot Club, but back then, she didn't know which materials could be considered to contain spirituality. She had merely moved them from the family treasury in accordance with the various essential oil formulas she had gathered. Klein nodded slightly and said, "When do you plan on holding the ritual?" This is based on the premise that there are no Beyonders around you. Does a Beyonder dog count? Audrey looked at the tightly shut door, feeling a small tug at her conscience. I can do it now. Klein tersely acknowledged. The ritual's process is the same as I described previously. All you need to do is change the prayer to Your devoted servant prays for your attention. I pray for you to open the gates to your kingdom. I pray for you to give me strength. In addition to this, use the dualism method. Audrey thought it over, fighting the urge to nod, and she began preparing for the ritual. When the illusory door opened, and a scene even more illusory than the cosmos appeared, Audrey felt intoxicated in both body and mind. This is the mysterious world I've always been pursuing. This is the kind of feeling I've always wanted. She praised Mr. Fool wholeheartedly. It's faith towards the goddess, but for the fool, it's worship. Audrey silently explained herself in her mind. Soon after, she was stunned to see that there was something on the altar. It was a soft object with lustrous color and was filled with ridges. The rainbow salamander's pituitary gland. Audrey felt a surge of joy in her heart. Her eyes lit up as she had the urge to step forward and grab it. However, her customs of etiquette took hold of her as she sincerely praised Mr. Fool once again. After finishing the ritual, she impatiently walked forward and carefully examined the Beyonder material 5 times. Our tarot club is at a higher level than all the other secret organizations. Audrey secretly felt smug. She then glanced warily at the door, as if afraid of Susie's sudden intrusion. She had to redouble her efforts and immediately concoct the potion to complete her advancement. A few minutes later, she held a bottle of liquid that contained constantly changing lusters that could shine to the bottom of everyone's hearts. She confidently drank the telepathist potion and successfully tied through the integration stage with the Beyonder characteristics, achieving an advancement. The view before her seemed to clear up significantly, with a great increase in other aspects. Audrey familiarly used cogitation to restrain the dissipating spirituality. After her sequence stabilized, she smiled and walked briskly to the door, letting in the golden retriever. She saw the obvious suspicion on Susie's face. You took far longer than usual. Susie didn't hide her thoughts. Audrey sat down on an ottoman and dryly laughed before changing the subject. Susie, tell me, how should I secretly inform Zio and Furs about a particular matter without revealing myself, yet get them interested? Before she finished her sentence, Audrey had begun to seriously ponder over the mission Mr. Fool had assigned her. Then, she looked at Susie, and Susie looked back at her. The human and dog both fell into deep thought at the same moment. After completing his goal, Klein returned to reality, slept for a little more than an hour before hurrying out the door. He spent £1 to buy a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, wigs, and a variety of mustaches that could be torn off and stuck on with adhesives. They were disguises he would need later. Before dinner, he made a trip to East Borough, the most crowded area and the most unsafe part of the city. He rented a 1-bedroom house at the rent of 4 soldi, 3 pence a week. He paid 2 weeks' rent and a deposit, coming up to a total of 17 solis. Only then did Klein complete all his early preparations. East Borough also left a deep impression on him. Most of the streets here were the same as Tingen's Lower Street, but the area that shared the traits was many times larger. The clothes of the residents here were old but decent. Many of them were dressed in shabby clothes with sallow skin and thin frames. It was as though they would turn into beasts at any moment due to their hunger or poverty. Therefore, gangs ran rampant in East Borough. When he got back to Sherwood Borough, Klein felt as if he had entered heaven from hell. For the next 2 days, he experimented with using his spirituality to perform the rituals and create charms. He no longer prayed to the goddess and waited for the effects of his tiny advertisements to bear fruit. On Thursday morning, Klein finally heard the doorbell ring. Chapter 222, The First Job. Ding. Dong. A rope was being